Okay, good. Ooh, look at that.
Ooh, magic.
All right, why don't we get started? And I have just a few short announcements tonight. Excuse me. The Workers' Justice Center of New York is sent around. I sent a thing to Rackla about a phone-in campaign on Friday, this Friday, to try and encourage our legislatures to put back into place the Excluded Workers Act. They put one in last year and ran out of funds in just 8 short weeks. So there's still 75,000 people that were waiting. And this fund is, as far as I understand, it's to help protect people that don't have access to unemployment and workers' cap, any of those things. And due to the pandemic, may have lost their jobs or were downscaled or whatever. So I hope to get more information out on that tomorrow. So be looking for that. But in the meantime, I will post up on the chat their Facebook link where you can go and get a tutorial about who to call, how to call, what to say. So I'll post that up here shortly. Also, I want to let you know that we do have some of Graham Russell's book testimonial about mining operations in Guatemala primarily, and Honduras. And we have extra copies if you're interested and you like to purchase one, $30, just let me know and I'll get you a copy of it. It's very interesting reading, and I've been to some of those communities too. So what they talk about is the truth. Rice and beans dinner, the steering committee is still looking to pull that off this year, honoring Dan Kovalik. And we're looking at whether we're doing indoors, outdoors, in the summer, in the spring, in the fall. So anyone interested in helping to put that whole plan together, please contact me, okay? And Terry, did you have a date yet for the 35th celebration for Tom Potts Dental Clinic?
No,
Okay.
no. So that's why I sent the article as best I could, but we haven't really finalized plans.
All right. Keep us posted.
It would be probably the end of May. The fourth week in May would be our plan.
Okay, I didn't want to miss it. So
yeah.
Very good. Does anybody else have an announcement to make? Okay. Well, I'm going to introduce you to Josh Rubin. He's part of the leadership team for Witness at the Border, which was founded in 2018. He visited the border to witness firsthand what was happening, and he was so moved and touched by what he saw that it made him stay. Witness started in Tornillo, Texas in 2018, moved to Homestead, Florida in 2019, to Brownsville, Texas in 2020, and in El Paso in 2021. I know we like to know more about people and put labels on them, so I'll tell you that at one point in his life, Joshua was a software developer from Brooklyn, New York. But after witnessing the children's detention centers there in Tornillo and Homestead, he's pretty much dedicated much of his life to speaking truth to power by witnessing at the border. And he's just one part of a very impressive leadership team that you can visit on their website. And I want to thank Jim Goodman, our member, for bringing Witness at the Border to our attention. And I want to thank Josh for being gracious to be here and let us know about his work and what's going on at the border. So Josh, it's all yours. Take it away. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Tom, and thanks everybody for the invitation and the opportunity to talk with you. It's nice. One of the nice things that happens, and there are so few nice things that happen in the field that we find ourselves in. One of the nice things is finding out that there are lots of other people out there that are watching and doing what they can and trying to figure out something that I think none of us have been able to figure out, which is how to change the policy that we have of disincentivizing migration by basically making it miserable for people who try to do it. I think from the little I know about your group, I know you pay a lot of attention to the things that are driving people out of the places that they're coming from, the people that arrive at the border. And I just want to note, before I start talking about Witness at the Border, that it's 1 year since the Biden administration promised to address the root causes of migration. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but I don't think they've done anything at all to do that. In fact, if they've done anything, they've made it considerably worse by propping up right-wing governments, by using Mexico as a client state to basically become the border, by adding Guatemala to that same border. That's a pretty wide border by now. When in 2018, what happened to me was I was starting to wind down my involvement in software, and I was watching a lot of MSNBC during the day. And you'll recall that somewhere around the middle of the year, family separation happened. And we started getting details about family separation at the border under Trump. And rather than sit there yelling at the television set, I decided to get up and move. What I was seeing on TV was an area of Texas that I'd spent some time in when I was very, very young, about 19 years old. I kind of spent some time being a vagabond and traveled around in South Texas and worked on a shrimp boat for a while. So what I was seeing was a place that I felt very familiar with. And I guess that's what made it possible for me to get myself up out of that chair in front of the TV and go down to the border and see what was going on. So I went down there and I got myself a place to stay very close to the Ursula Detention Center in McAllen. And the Ursula Detention Center in McAllen, which has just recently been reopened, it was closed for a while for renovation. It's a huge place, and it was the place where I think it was MSNBC, where they actually had correspondents go in and discover that children were being taken away from their families. That was the place where they were dividing them. And that's the place where I think probably all of us heard the crying children that stirred for a moment the nation. Everybody was interested in this at that point. And it seemed like there was, as horrible as that was, there seemed to be some sort of a hope that people would be horrified enough to want to stop this. And in a sense, it did do that. You know, we got overt family separation stopped at that point. Of course, covert family separation still goes on, and I'll talk more about that later on when we discuss the children's detention centers that got my focus after a while. Anyway, I went to the Ursula Detention Center, and I did what probably some of you have done. I blocked the driveway, and I got put in jail overnight. And I got to know some other people who were in the cell with me, a Coyote and a Mara Salvatrucha member, fully tattooed, and a family of gypsies that had been stopped at a checkpoint and spent 24 hours trying to figure out how to talk to all those different languages that were involved. But I think those of you who've done things like that probably know how much it stays with you. So I got out of the jail there. I met up with some people that I had corresponded with, and we drove across to El Paso. And on the way to El Paso, we stopped at a place called Tornillo. Tornillo is a port of entry about 40 miles to the southeast of El Paso. It's a port of entry, and it was also a place where, according to the news, they'd put up some tents, and some of those children that had been separated were being kept in those tents. I went there. I really didn't know what I was seeing. I stood out there for a while. I had a sign that said "Free them," and I stood there and waved at the cars going by and got some honks and some jeers. But mainly, there wasn't very much traffic at all. It was a very quiet place. As I say, I didn't know exactly what to make of it. I was trying to find my feet. I went to El Paso again some weeks later for a conference, and I was at a meeting after an action, kind of an action weekend, you know, where people went and toured the border and walked across the bridge in El Paso. And it was a kind of a post-mortem kind of meeting that people like us have after an action. And one woman stood up and said that she was tired of hearing about people who come down for a few days and think they've actually done something. And I felt like I thought that she was talking about me, because of course she could have been easily. It was true. I'd gone down and I guess made myself feel better by going and seeing what was going on. But I wasn't about to stick around, it didn't seem, until she said that. And so after a while, I went home and I kept corresponding with people in El Paso. And I came up with this idea that I didn't know what to do. And I forget who it was who said before, how are we going to address this horrible situation and make it better? I have absolutely no idea how to do that. And I would have to say that the organization that has grown out of whatever it was that I was doing then, we don't know either. And we don't know yet. And maybe the real purpose of the organization is trying to find a way to be effective, a way that actually kind of breaks the mold a little bit. I proposed that I could go there and simply be there in front of the detention center. The population of children was growing there. I found a way that I could actually see by wearing my binoculars all the time, see children being marched around at arm's length apart. See them start, see them moving, see the staff moving, see what was going on there, which was a lot of equipment and tents and portable bathrooms being moved in while they were putting out public statements saying that they were about to close. It was obviously just the opposite of what they were saying. It was happening. So what I decided to do was kind of bamboozle the county there. And I told them that I was a film company. And I asked whether I could park an RV on county land right outside the federal installation there. And I got somebody to say yes. And I went down there. I arranged to rent an RV. I parked it there, and I stayed there for 3 months. And in the course of that time, I learned a lot about what goes on at the border. There's something about being at the border. I'm sure many of you have been down there. That just intensifies what it is that we're talking about when we talk about the problem of our policy having to do with migration. But it's more than that. The border does terrible things right there. It makes a zone that makes it difficult for people to live. And I watched people going back and forth. I learned a lot about it while I was there in the middle of cotton fields there on both sides of the border. There's a lot of cotton being grown there and some pecan being grown there. It was once that area, a big cooperative project that was done in the 40s to channel the river, the Rio Grande, or the Rio Bravo, to channel that river and use it for irrigation so that it could be a major agricultural area for both sides. And that seemed to have succeeded to some extent. In the town across the river, which I walked to from time to time, I walked across the bridge, feeling as I don't know if you've had this feeling, that feeling that you have when you're doing something that other people just can't do so quite so easily. I was able to walk across the bridge and back. The birds were able to fly across the river and back, and lots of people were not allowed to cross. At any rate, I crossed the river there. The town on the other side called Caseta for the little booth that was set up there originally for customs purposes, right? It was called the Caseta. And in that town, there was a police station that was shuttered because it's an area that's entirely controlled by cartel. It's a very peaceful area because it's only one cartel in charge. And the cartel, I learned later, also controlled what went on the American side of the river. Well, for instance, the cartel determined who was on the school board in the small town of Tornillo. I saw children coming across the bridge each day to be picked up by a school bus so that they could go to school on this side. Chances are they were American citizens who were living on the other side because it was cheaper to live over there with their relatives. So there were some people who were crossing and not, which brings to mind, those of you who have been to El Paso, so many families have been divided there by the violence in Juarez. Some families that, when things got violent enough, simply stopped going and stopped visiting their cousins and relatives because of the kind of buildup of violent syndicates that happened kind of in conjunction with NAFTA, I think, drawing a lot of people to the border. But back to Tornillo. Every time I tried to move around the camp to get closer to the children, this was never exactly solved for me, but local people in pickup trucks, I didn't know who they were, would come up and be very threatening and tell me that I couldn't be where I was. Even though it seemed to me that I was on road, and it was dirt road, but it looked like public road, and it looked like you could drive on it. But they objected to my walking on it. And it took a long time before I got, I guess I got the courage to just keep going and see what would happen. And so I started walking around. I started getting closer to seeing the kids who would be playing soccer at the farthest fields in the enclosed area. And I would watch them playing soccer and be able to talk to kids and ask them how long they'd been there and things like that. Usually with guards threatening me the entire time. But after a while, I was either crazy enough or brave enough to ignore them long enough to be able to talk to the kids that were there. There were kids that were there for 3 months and 4 months and 5 months. And it became apparent, if it wasn't already, that the Trump administration was not placing these kids. So what was this place? This is an Office of Refugee Resettlement facility. It was called an influx shelter. Influx shelter was the name of what was not a licensed facility. It was on federal land, not on state land. The state is what licenses places like this. So on federal land, a lot of the rules didn't apply in an influx shelter. The Flores agreement, are you aware of the Flores settlement, which says that you're not supposed to keep kids for more than 20 days. You have to educate them. There are a number of standards that you have to use to take care of children under these things because of the abuses in past years. But an influx shelter didn't have those things apply because it was on federal land. The state wasn't involved. And it was clear that kids were not being placed. Even the administration of the place, after a while, became very, very unhappy because they thought that they were supposed to be placing these kids, and still the numbers just kept growing. Well, I was there for 3 months, I said, right? I kept in contact with people in El Paso. And people would come out and visit me and, you know, bring food. We'd hang around. The afternoon, I started conducting, you know, tours around the place, along the wall, you know, which loomed there. And after a while, there was a group of religious leaders who came down, who decided to come down based on what they had heard about the place. I had started a Facebook group page, and I was writing about what I was seeing. And little by little, more and more people showed up, and there was momentum for an event that got called Christmas in Tornillo. At Christmas in Tornillo, a bunch of people showed up. There was some amplification equipment. There were some musicians that showed up. But more important, most likely to what eventually happened, is some people from Congress showed up. We had people show up there, and Beto O'Rourke showed up. You know, but a bunch of people started coming. It started getting press. I would be visited, you know, every other day by somebody who wanted to do an interview, wanted to do a short TV spot. I would show them around. I would talk to them. I had a good spiel, probably better than the one you're getting now because I'm out of practice. But it got that attention, and it got enough attention so that the guy who was running the place, the organization that was running it was called the Baptist Child Services, Baptist Child and Family Services, and a private nonprofit. And the guy who was running it didn't like the pressure, didn't like bad publicity, didn't like the feeling that people were talking about how horrible this was, that people were seeing the kids. A number of television stations had come down and filmed. A film company had come and filmed me. They were getting bad publicity. And by the beginning of the year, the end of the year, just about 31st, we got the word that Tornillo was going to be closed. And we stayed just long enough to watch those huge tents being taken down and disassembled, and the place vacated. I went home. You know, on the way home, I was, I stopped and I spoke at various places along the way. There was some, you know, people who had arranged some dates for me to talk about what happened there. And, you know, it was a kind of an empty feeling, because I knew these kids that had left there. Some of them probably went to other similar places, right? Some of them, though, actually got placed with families, but all of them were subject to deportation eventually, right? You know, you don't automatically, just because you're placed with a family, automatically get regularized status. So it seemed like it was just for this, even just this one camp, the beginning of a struggle, the beginning of what the process was going to be for these kids. Anyway, after a while, I went home, and when I got home, thinking I would spend some time there, I got a call about a week in from a psychiatrist who was working with kids who had been at these places, and said to me, "You have to go to Homestead. You have to go to Homestead, Florida, which is another influx shelter near an Air Force base, actually attached to an Air Force Reserve base, again on federal land." She said, "You have to go there because it's worse. We have rumors that kids are being put into solitary confinement, particularly gay and lesbian kids and trans kids were being put into solitary confinement there." So I talked to some people who actually beat me down there. We set up down there, and we were there for about 7 months. This took a lot longer. we couldn't camp out in front, but we showed up every day and put up little shelters to keep us out of the sun. And we found that if we got step ladders and stood on the other side of the road, we could stand up on those step ladders and we could see in and we could actually wave at the kids, talk to the kids over the fence, which they desperately tried to get us to stop doing, telling us that it was absolutely illegal to do this. And we spent, I can't tell you how much time dealing with the police, who would be called several times a day to do something about us. And luckily, some of them didn't know what to do or didn't want to participate in what the camp was doing, and didn't haul us away. Not to say that that didn't eventually happen, but we were able to negotiate our presence, which I find now is a big part of this kind of action that I'm describing. It's an action that I'm sure other people have done before, but I was new to it. And a lot of it has to do with just kind of establishing your presence and constantly battling about where you can stand. Can you stand here? Can you put your foot there? Who owns this property? Who gets to say? Who are the authorities? And how scared can they make you? So we were there for 7 months, and involved in those battles every day with people intimidating us, using their vehicles to intimidate us. But we had some luck there too, and the luck was this: the Democratic candidates were just starting up, and they were having the ones for president. They were having their first debate in Miami. And there's this group of people that kind of teamed up with us, mostly from New England. They call themselves bird doggers. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
Yeah, well, the bird doggers were just amazing people, because what they did was they went to these candidates, and while videoing them, said, will you commit to going to Homestead, to visiting? And, you know, some of them, quite a number of them said, of course, yes, we have to go down there. It's our duty. And when the time came and they called this debate and they were in Miami, they called in their chips and said, we have you on tape saying you'd go here. Where are you? And they started showing up. Lots of them. They were there for days, coming in and out. And television crews from all over the country were there. They set up their tents, we set up our tents, and we were there. And they would come and they would talk to us. And then I would lead them down to the road where we have the step ladders set up. And we get up on those step ladders, and they would look at the kids, and, some of them would get tears in their eyes, and some of them would make speeches. And I'd lend them my binoculars, and they'd stand there with my binoculars. I have pictures of all kinds of Democratic candidates standing with my binoculars. And the television cameras filmed them. And they all said, places like this have to close. And when I'm in office, this will be gone. This won't be here. And they closed it. They put it on what they called warm status, but they got rid of all the kids. They sent them all out. So after 7 months, the place was closed, and we were feeling pretty cocky then, right? We closed 2 places, we thought. I went home again, and some of the people that I'd worked with at these places called me up. Some of the people that are now, the mainstays of Witness at the Border called up and said, why don't we take these people? By now, our Facebook group had 15,000 people in it. Why don't we see if we can get people to go down to the border, the border itself, and look at MPP, look at Remain in Mexico, because that policy was in full force then, and people were being expelled. So Remain in Mexico was going on in California, it was going on in El Paso, and it was going on in the Rio Grande Valley. And so we called a little road trip and went down there and looked at a few of those places and decided that Brownsville was the best place. There's a little park right across the street from the bridge, and we could set up in this public park, set up our signs, and we could participate in all of the relief actions that were going on there. There was a lot of stuff that I don't know how familiar you are with all the organizations that were bringing food, bringing services across the river there. Team Brownsville, the Angry Tias and Abuelas, the Resource Center in Matamoros. All of those groups were busy supporting a community of people who were basically living in tents right across the bridge. They were living in tents right across the bridge because they were waiting for their opportunity to get called. So they come to the border, they register, they say, we're here for asylum. And they say, go back and wait, we'll call you. And the camp grew and grew, and it filled the plaza. And they moved the people from the plaza to the banks of the river, and they strung them out along the banks of the river. And there were campsites along the banks of the river. The river occasionally would rise and threaten, but these people held on. They held on tight. They built stoves out of the clay in the earth there. They chopped down mesquite to burn it so that they could cook. A couple of places opened a little restaurant selling pupusas. We went there and we set up camp every morning with our signs. And again, we got into that position where, members of the media would come, they would talk to us. We staged events like light shows where we would project text on the actual crossing, the border patrol crossing there, the CBP crossing, and we'd say, let them cross, and we'd march around and we'd go to the wall and we'd, as usual, get in trouble with the authorities to some extent. And we were there for over 60 days, and COVID happened. And we were scared of getting it, and we were scared of giving it. And I don't know, we're all of us not that young, right? And we were scared of COVID. We were scared of getting it, especially scared of giving it, I think. And we retreated. And reluctantly retreated. But before we did, and this became kind of important to our later activity, before we did, while we were in Brownsville, we discovered something. Somebody tipped us off to the fact that deportation flights were leaving from the Brownsville airport. And it's a small airport. And we went there, we figured out a way using an application, an app you can buy called FlightAware. We started waking each other up at 3 a.m. and saying, hey, there's a flight at 4:30. Let's meet at the airport. And we'd go to the airport and we'd sneak around. Again, we'd be greeted, if we were too careless, we'd be greeted by, this time, actual ICE officers who were, by the way, you really don't want to be greeted by them. They're very unpleasant people. But we were there, we'd sneak around, we'd see it, we'd take pictures, we'd watch for the first time men, women, and children in shackles being loaded on planes. And the first time, you could not avoid crying. After a while, of course, we hardened ourselves to it and we watched it and we developed strategies for seeing it better and for photographing it better and for talking about it better. And from those early days when we went there and actually saw it in person and saw it as witnesses, which is by then what we called ourselves, we kept watching even after COVID happened. We kept watching by looking at this app and by looking at information that we could get online. And I think when Tom contacted me for this meeting, I think he was trying to get Tom Cartwright, who became the guy who was really the expert in these flights. He along with some others in this organization now, we are the authority on deportation and expulsion flights and prison transfer flights by ICE Air. All of the national press depends on us for that information at this point, because Tom studied it for so long that he understood the patterns. He knows the patterns, and he publishes them in tweets. If you haven't followed Thomas Cartwright, follow him, and you will see every single day, you'll see those flights tracked all over the place, including now a special emphasis on the flights to Haiti, which is the largest mass expulsion of people that we've seen in 75 years. In the last couple of days, you'll see a flight start to Colombia, where Venezuelans are being dumped in Colombia. To do what? I don't know exactly. Stay there, walk back to Venezuela. I don't know. It's people supposedly who have some sort of regularized status in Colombia. But that's what we do. We watch those flights, and we report on them. And as I say, there isn't a major news source in the world that doesn't rely on the information that they're getting. That started with us going to the Brownsville airport and watching people walk up those steps in small steps because of their chained legs. Since COVID, we've paid a lot of attention to what's happened as a result of Title 42. Everybody's familiar with Title 42. I don't have to explain that, do I?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. One of the effects of Title 42 is that the only people that get to stay are kids, and adults are sent back. And speaking of de facto family separation, that of course is the effect. The effect is, if you can't come across as a family, if your kids are actually a little too old, because if they're young, you have a chance of coming across as a family and getting paroled. But if the kids are teens, the family is going to be sent back. And the only way of getting part of your family here, 80% of whom have some family in the States, is to send your kids across. So you have this de facto family separation going on, and you had a whole bunch of new shelters opening up. I really don't want to call them shelters. They're detention centers for kids. They were called emergency intake shelters because they weren't influx shelters, which actually had a little bit more regulation. They're emergency intake shelters, and they opened them up. One was in Dallas, you'll remember. It was a convention center, and that was open for a while. The one that concerned us the most was Fort Bliss. I remember when we were out in El Paso and we were working to close Tornillo, one of the things that scared us is, what if we succeeded and they decided to move that camp to Fort Bliss, where we would never be able to get close to the middle? Fort Bliss is bigger than the state of Rhode Island. Fort Bliss is the largest military base in the country. And Fort Bliss got opened up as an emergency intake shelter. Yeah. And so our organization decided to try to stage an action. We knew we couldn't get close, but we wanted to do something symbolic. So one of the things we did was we went to El Paso and we went to the bridge, the Santa Fe Bridge, which crosses the river. And from the base of that bridge, we walked to Fort Bliss, a number of miles to Fort Bliss. A publicity stunt, you know, something to get attention. We got some TV out of it. I don't know, we were desperate. We were desperate to find something that would get some attention. There are plenty of places now that still have kids in them. I guess, sort of pleased, or I have to note anyway, that there's some documentation out there that says that they didn't want to open up Tornillo or Homestead for political reasons. Tornillo, because we'd made such a fuss there and gotten so much attention there, and Homestead because Kamala Harris stood next to me on the ladder and said, this place should never be. Places like this should never be. So we think that they were too afraid to open it up in those places, but of course they have lots of choices and they're using them. We hope also that the fact that kids are being processed quicker now than they were under Trump, or even in the beginning of this administration, possibly because they thought, we hope, it sounds a little hubristic to say it, but we hope it's because they felt that they would get a lot of attention. In fact, from us, from the likes of us, because we've done it before. And that maybe it's going faster now. It is going faster. The problem is, of course, that we're creating the unaccompanied children, just like we're creating the conditions that I know you pay attention to in Central America that drive people north. Now, we are responsible for driving the whole situation. So the fact that we're getting these kids out of these tent shelters that they set up in Fort Bliss at a faster rate than before is just a small comfort. But they are getting out faster. And that's what we do. That's what we're trying. The idea was, I'd spent my youth, going to big mass demonstrations. I worked for the United Farm Workers on the grape boycott, on the lettuce boycott. I did those things, and I was looking for something that might get a little attention in a different way. And there was a moment when that was happening. When we went to Tornillo, when we went to Homestead, we got a different kind of attention for a little while. We came up with that. Now we're watching those flights. We're signing statements. We're holding webinars. We do podcasts. Witness Radio is our podcast. We have one of our members who's writing a book. We have another one who's working on international tribunals. We do an analysis, and we wait for an opportunity to get back there on the ground when Omicron doesn't have us quite so scared. And when we think of a place where this kind of a tactic might work again, going in person, witnessing and reporting from the field about what we're seeing and seeing what happens from that.
Wow, I'm speechless. What a story. It's phenomenal. I think what I'll do is see if we have any questions from anybody on our meeting. James Goodman.
Can you speak a little more about the flights with the unaccompanied children? If you look at Fox and New York Post, they make a big deal of that now. They call them the secret flights, and they're just being placed with sponsors, as I understand it.
Well, they're some of them being placed with sponsors. Some of them are being put into ORR shelters, and there's nothing particularly secret about them. They've been going on for a long time. And if Fox News wanted to know about them, all they'd have to do is ask the government. It's easily obtained information. They're it's just being played for. I don't know what to say about it. There's nothing new going on. You have to get these kids. I mean, they from their point of view, they have to get these kids to places. Particularly, it's better to get them to hard-walled places from tent places. So when they fly them to Florida, which horrifies Governor DeSantis so much, his crocodile tears about this. All they're doing is putting these kids into shelters that specialize in basically taking care of these kids until they can be placed. These kids are considered in 4 categories. The first category is kids who actually have parents in the country somewhere. And the idea is to get them to those parents as quickly as possible. 2, some sort of close relatives, category 2. Category 3, friends that are close to the family. And category 4, nobody out there for them. But you know, the first 3 categories contain way better than 80% of the kids. And it's a process of getting them to those places. Is it a good situation? No, it's not a good situation. OR is an organization with lots of flaws and lots of problems and lots of behaviors that we don't approve of, like, you know, psychotropic drugs when they have kids that are having a hard time and things like that without consent, and all kinds of things that shouldn't happen, including, by the way, you know, if somebody comes to the border and presents at the border with a kid, and this person is the grandmother or the aunt or the older brother or the older sister, they separate them there because their definition of family has to be, you know, it's parent. You know, Americans only have parents. They don't have other relatives, apparently, that take care of them. As we know, in Latin America, it's very common for families to be all kinds of different configurations. But they insist that they have to take these kids away from them. And then they have to go through this horrible process. But, you know, there really is absolutely nothing to what Fox is doing about this. It's the other thing that they're doing, which puts us in such a strange position. I should have mentioned this before, is, you know, they keep saying that the border is open. Well, it's true that some people get in and some people don't, but the border is far from open. I mean, we have expelled under Title 42 a million times. That's hardly open. But I don't like being put in the position of basically defending the Biden administration by saying, oh no, they really haven't, you know, they really have closed the border. I'd like them to open the border. I don't know how you guys would feel. I would like to see an open border, and I don't want to make excuses for the Biden administration that they're being tough. I think they're being assholes, and I think they're being incredibly cruel. And I think we have a policy that basically is saying we're going to close it off. We're not going to do it. We're not going to allow these people to move. And I believe in the freedom of movement for people. I believe migration isn't a crime. It's a solution to problems that are people having right now. Those people are trying to solve their problem by moving. If I decided to move to California for a better job, I'd be solving my problem by moving. Freedom of movement, the right to migrate. Sorry, that was longer than you needed.
Terry, hold on a minute, Granny. Terry, you had a question about what percentage of flights go to other countries. You mean other than Central America?
Well, it sounds like a lot of the flights, some of the flights are actually moving people from one location to another in the US. And then some of the flights are going directly to throw them out into other countries. And, you know, that's confusing. I mean, both of them are horrible because moving people when families are trying to come to get back together is really cruel. We see that in all the detention centers.
Yes, you know, one of the things that we tracked, we realized was going on a lot by watching some of those flights was that people were being staged for deportation. And this was even before Title 42, staged by being moved from one place to another to aggregate enough people for a flight. Like a lot of people would be flown from Yuma to Louisiana. And from Louisiana, they would be expelled from the country. And so there was a lot of shifting around. And one of the things that really concerned us was, especially at the beginning as we were tracking these things, was with COVID, it was an incredibly efficient way of spreading the disease, of shifting them around to a whole bunch of different places before getting them on a plane and getting them out of the country. But yeah, we call them lateral flights. And there are deportation flights, there are Title 42 expulsion flights. They're the kind of flights that we were talking about before, where they're just moving kids from one place to another shelter, to distribute them to different shelters, and also to place them with their sponsors. There are all these different kinds of flights. We can characterize them. Most of the time, we know what they are. So if you follow Tom Cartwright, you'll be able to see that. He should be coming out with his monthly report, by the way, in a day or two. So if you catch that, it's a weighty document with lots of information, and you'll know more than anybody else knows.
Grania?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for your incredible work and for just having such an original way of approaching and documenting these issues, and your work with the press. My question is remain in Mexico, which of course the Biden administration had said they would do away with, and have continued it instead. And do you have insight into where, I know there's a large number of folks in Tijuana, a bunch of different places. And I'm wondering, do you have any updates about Remain in Mexico?
I do. It was the Fifth Circuit in Texas that ordered the restoration of Remain in Mexico.
Right.
Believe it or not, I think I'm pretty convinced that the Biden administration really doesn't want to do Remain in Mexico, that they simply are going along with that court order. There's a couple of reasons for that, but here's the evidence for it first. The evidence is that we're really talking in the hundreds here, whereas with Title 42, without any documentation necessary at all, like I say, there've been 1 million expulsions. Right. So Title 42 is a lot easier. Title 42 has kind of the amazing quality of, you send people back across the border, they can come back again because their names haven't even been taken. You don't even know who they are. They can come back again, try again. Remain in Mexico, especially with the promises that the Biden administration made to Mexico about it, and with the promises for procedure that they've set up, is a very expensive process. It just started again in the Rio Grande Valley, where we're really only talking about, I think at this point, less than 200 people. Title 42 is overwhelmingly bigger and a bigger problem. It's a very expensive process. It requires all kinds of things from CBP that they don't want to do, that they hate doing. If the Biden administration could stop Remain in Mexico now, they would stop Remain in Mexico now. Unfortunately, there's no sign that they're going to stop Title 42, which is the most horrendous program of them all, really.
Okay. It's just that my understanding was that there are still thousands of people, not necessarily in the Rio Grande Valley, but throughout the border, that are waiting months for asylum, for hearings on their asylum cases, and that the Biden administration has now named asylum officers to hear those cases. These are new people that are trained in supposedly trained, but they're actually officers. They're not judges or lawyers. So I just was surprised to kind of find when I read something about that, but I really didn't know how many people that affected.
Yeah, the Biden administration through Title 42 is avoiding registering people's claims to asylum. That they're avoiding that because they don't, they say, well, it was torn down we don't have a system. Of course, they've had a while to set something up now, but they're not really interested in setting it up at this point. They're simply solving this problem, which is for them a political problem. And not that I think the Biden administration does have the same philosophy as all the administrations, all our recent administrations, which is they don't want people crossing the border. And they want to discourage it by disincentivizing behavior. In other words, being mean, making it hard, making people suffer by coming in. I'll give you an example. There's a big debate in the White House now about whether to vaccinate people who come to the border. And the argument against vaccinating people that come to the border is that it might give them an incentive to come, as if people are going to come through, come through Panama and come all the way to the border in order to get a shot. It's a completely absurd idea, but that's how sensitive they are. I think that there's nothing that scares the Biden administration more than the issue of immigration, and that they're willing to be absolutely horrible in order to defend themselves against the attacks that are going to come from the right anyhow.
Anyway, right.
Right.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you.
Josh, these influx centers, did the operators of that get paid like a certain amount of dollars per child, and that's one of the reasons why they retained them? And then the second part of my question is, have you been able to follow up with any of the kids that have been placed?
The private places that run the influx shelters and a lot of the OR shelters too, yes, they get paid a fee per kid per day, and there's definitely money to be made doing that. And a number of places have made quite a bit of money. As far as follow-ups go, yes, there's some following up. I'm aware of a couple of kids myself who I got reports on. I can't report on their psychological well-being. I know that experts say that the trauma of being in these places is extraordinary, and that that a lot of these kids will not recover from the separation, the trauma that they had on top of the trauma of being separated from their families. That it's going to be hard for a lot of those kids. Some of them, of course, we all know kids who are tougher than others, and they'll do okay. But the damage, according to Amy Cohen, a psychiatrist who works in this field, the damage is extraordinary. The extent of the damage is extraordinary. She works with a lot of them.
Jeez. Oh, man. Other questions? Thoughts, issues? Terry, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we hear mixed things in our area, maybe, about what is the support of the Latino or the Hispanic communities throughout the United States to this. In other words, opening the borders would take pressure to cause our government to open the borders, to even think of it, to even think of saying that. But right. That pressure could come from possibly from Hispanic populations, but I don't think what we hear is that that's not likely to happen. I just wondered what your impression is.
Yeah, it's going to take a real sea change in all of the thinking of people in this country, Latinx and everybody else in the world, really, to start thinking of the world as a different kind of place, right? A place where we actually are trying to solve a problem or several problems together. There are lots of problems. There's inequality that besides the chaos that we sow in so many of these countries, there's climate change that's sowing a lot of chaos there too, and it's gonna get worse. People are going to be on the move in a big way, and I don't know how. Somebody's gonna have to tell me how you get people to get over their own sense of deprivation, their own sense of fear and insecurity enough so that they can realize that the only solution is for us to share better and to both territorially and wealth, in terms of wealth. It's going to take a big kind of change, and I don't know how you get there. All I know is that it's good to talk to people who think that way too, because then we don't feel so alone.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, Martin.
Talked about flights to Haiti. Is it people going from the US back to Haiti or the other way?
Oh yeah, no, they're going from the US back to Haiti. Almost all Haitians are being Title 42.
Okay.
Yeah, they're being sent back. In fact, I believe 1 out of every 9 people in Haiti now has been sent back by us.
Okay. And is the military government in Haiti now? Has there been a coup, so to speak?
There was a coup, and it's a very weak government in Haiti. The United States is promising somehow that government's going to go away. It's really not going to change very much unless there's significant aid there. We're talking about a disaster in Haiti. Haiti is in a disastrous situation, and like I said, we're expelling just about everybody. Nobody gets treated worse than the Haitians. It's a color thing. The darker you are, the worse you get treated. Mm-hmm. And the Haitians are being treated horribly. The Africans that were flying back also treated horribly. We have a case that's pending where people were flown back to Africa using a device called the RAP that was being improperly used, that basically used as a torture device on the flights that are over. There's a lawsuit. The fact that this were uncovered by one of the members of our group, and there's a lawsuit now pending having to do with that kind of torture. In detention centers, it's well known that the darker you are, the worse it is.
Yeah. And then how did people from Haiti get into the United States? And was it over a long time, or was there a recent?
There was a recent kind of influx down in Del Rio, but there were a lot of people that moved into Mexico and were moving across Mexico, and somehow we don't exactly know how this happened, but there was a network, and they all decided they're gonna push it in Del Rio, and they were gonna cross that river, and that's where you saw that horrible scene of the CBP people on horseback,
oh yeah,
whipping with their ropes and stuff like that. They just decided they were going to come across the river and see what would happen. Well, what would happen, and is what did happen, which is, all of them, pretty much all of them, loaded onto planes, sent back to Haiti. There was a period of time when there were 3, 4 flights a day, taking people back. There are a lot of people that are getting into South America and moving their way through the isthmus and getting up into Mexico and moving toward the border, and life in a border town in Mexico when you're Haitian is also not a very pleasant experience.
And there's a photo of a young girl who drowned in the shirt of her father, who also drowned. Was that related to those people crossing the Rio Grande at that time, or that's another thing?
That's another thing that happened near Brownsville.
Okay.
That was Valeria. That happened a lot months earlier. Mm-hmm. A horrible sight.
Josh, just out of curiosity, do you have a feel for the percentage of folks you see coming from Nicaragua versus the other, say, the triangle countries, like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador?
Well, we've seen lately a trend upward, and I refer you again to Tom Cartwright's work, but we see a trend upward in Nicaragua, and one of the reasons is that we think we're speculating. One of the reasons is that Nicaragua is not accepting very many Title 42 flights back, so they have a better chance of being paroled here. I would say that this is probably temporary and limited. But one of the problems with Title 42 is if the country that you want to fly people back to says no, like Cubans, for instance, who take no flights, you have a much better chance in the short term of getting, of getting a stay of removal and being released to basically show up for a status hearing later on. So some of the countries that are saying no, Nicaragua is one of the countries that's saying pretty much no. It allows like 1 or 2 flights a month, whereas a place like Guatemala is getting flights every day. They're playing along. Nicaragua is resisting a bit.
Now, another thing I've heard is that they send people back to say, they'll take them and put them on a bus or on a plane and just dump them off in a country that's not their origin. And do they do that with children too? Just send them back to fend for themselves?
If they're Mexican, they send them back to the agency, LADIF in Mexico. So if they're Mexican, they're going to go to basically the country, the organization that runs orphanages in Mexico. For other countries, no, we're keeping the kids. We are mostly keeping the kids at this point. As far as sending people back to countries where they didn't come from, that was an idea that was used under Trump, where he got places like Guatemala to agree to, it was called ACA, and to agree to take people from other countries and basically be the disposer of those people. We'll take them some. They were offering, for instance, they were sending Hondurans to Guatemala, and Guatemala was saying, well, we'll give you asylum here, or you can go back to Honduras. And of course, most people chose to go back to Honduras. After all, people are starving in Guatemala. Doesn't sound like such a great place to go. So for now, one of the things that we're very worried about is in the last couple of days, there was that first flight of Venezuelans to Colombia. So under the Biden administration, this is the first time we're seeing that. Basically, it's remain in Colombia, right? We have remain in Mexico, which is going on here on the border, where we send people from any country. We send them to Mexico to wait. It's very small numbers, but it is a program that is doing just that, sending people from a different place to another country to do what they will there. The thing that makes us nervous about is the Colombia thing, because that's the beginning of that same concept of, if you can cow a country into doing it, you can you can offer them aid, you can make them deals. We know the kinds of deals that the United States can make with these places and turn them into basically enforcers, and to hell with the people.
So basically, our illegal sanctions in Venezuela, and where we're choking them to death and everything else, we force the people to leave to try to find food or find work or whatever. And when they get here, after making that treacherous trip, we just turn around and send them to a foreign country that's not their own.
Well, you're right. These are people that have already crossed the border so far. These are people that already crossed the border from Venezuela into Colombia and then made their way up. And they got regularized status in Colombia. Unfortunately, Colombia is internally at war and not a good place to stay. So, once you get across that border, once you get pushed out of Venezuela where you're being starved, you go to a place like Colombia where you're going to be starved too. And you make your way north. And now there's a deal to load the Colombians. Now, it's only been 2 people so far. We're talking 2 days now that we know about this. 1 flight, 2 people. But apparently the administration is stating this as if it's a principle. So we're worried about it.
Okay. Well, I think that probably pretty much gives us quite a bit to digest. Terry, you got something else? Just unmute yourself, Terry.
Okay, it's not a fair question, but the harassment of when you're witnessing at these camps, the harassment by unmarked people, that's something we also hear a lot about at Standing Rock, and the women, the indigenous water protection. And, it reminds me of what we always heard about militias in Colombia or paramilitaries. So are these groups, do you feel that there's some evidence or a way to find evidence that these groups are being organized by, what kind of forces are behind this? Is it just spontaneous beer drinking kids who enjoy harassing people, or is it something that is somewhat being organized?
The kind of stuff that you're talking about only happened at Tornillo to me, and they identified as people who owned the land around there. So I can't really say they were not loose cannons. They seemed very, in a weird way, kind of disciplined, quite threatening, but disciplined. And even though I had the feeling that they were carrying guns, when it ever escalated, they ended up calling the police and not using them. I don't know. I mean, I know now what's going on in Texas is horrendous, but they're uniformed, so we know who they are. The only other time that this happened was at the Brownsville airport, where for a while the ICE agents were not identifying themselves to us, but they were in fact ICE agents. And I just want to say that while it was frightening for me, it is much less frightening to be a white guy doing this than it is. I've been with Latinx people at these actions, and the level of fear and the level of worry and the way we act is completely different because of the kind of trauma that this happens. So I may act real gutsy when I'm surrounded by white people, or even just by myself as a white person. But when you're in a mixed crowd like that, just made me think of it when you were talking about indigenous women being harassed and things like that. How frightening, how much more terrifying it is. I kind of got a kick out of it, to tell you the truth. I come out of it with a story to tell, but I've also been with people who are terrified in a way that terrified me.
Wow.
Thank you.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight and to bring your story and your witness to this group of people. And it's really affected me. I appreciate it so much, and appreciate your being here.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you invited me, and I'm glad to know you're out there, and that somewhere up in New York State there's a group of people. I may call on you.
We're here. We'll answer the call.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll be in touch with you on email after this. But before everybody else goes, I want to just show you the link, the Facebook link, if you want to join in with a Western New York Center for Justice for the Excluded Workers Act. Can you see that?
Yes.
So if you got your pencils and papers handy, you could write that down, or just send me your email to rtward73@outlook.com and I'll send it to you via email. But if you can join us on the call-in on Friday, I'm sure they're going to appreciate it very much. And this is to get access to the training to it. It's about 30 minutes long, I think. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you,
wonderful insight. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here and for all your support, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. I forgot Alex Saab. There's a seminar on freeing Alex Saab. His wife will be speaking to us if you haven't gotten that information. Again, my email is rtward73@outlook.com, or just go on the RACLA website and send an email to RACLA and I'll get it. And I'll send you the link to join that tomorrow afternoon. It should be very interesting. If you don't know, Alex Saab is a politician, I think, or journalist.
Journalist.
He came up here to get some supplies and things for the people in Venezuela against the cargo, and our US government scooped them up and imprisoned them really unjustly. So find out more and how you can help get them free tomorrow afternoon. Thank you all very much for coming. And I look forward to seeing you either tomorrow night or next Wednesday. Oh, our next meeting is going to be, what is it, Kathy?
It is March 2nd. March 2nd.
March 2nd, we've got two speakers, one on the Human Rights School, Lucy Parsons, and Bandago Shingo is going to be talking to us about Venezuela. Okay? You'll get notified. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you, Tom.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
I really
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
appreciate it.
Ah.